Here's what my sweetheart said. He said whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. He said what will be, will be. Now I have children of my own. They ask if mother, what will I be?
Good morning, everyone. Bore da I chi gyd. Hope you've all had a nice cup of coffee, cup of tea, and ready for the day ahead. So, on behalf of Cymru Dyfed, welcome to Myddfai Community Hall. Croeso I Neuadd Gymuned Myddfai. My name is Jess Davis, and I'm your host for today. I'm very excited to be here. I know we have a lot of inspirational and incredible people here today that we're going to be hearing from. This is a truly special occasion. Today, you'll have the opportunity to salute our World War II veterans who fought and defeated the tyranny of Nazi Germany and her allies. We owe them a great debt, and this morning, we will have an amazing opportunity to hear first-hand accounts from them and also to say a heartfelt thank you. Diolch. Round of applause to them, definitely. This afternoon, we also have the opportunity to acknowledge the sacrifices made by our children of the war. In the audience today, we have men and women of Great Britain who survived repeated attacks by the German Air Force. Their stories are no less compelling than those who served in the wartime military, and many of those you'll hear from later went on to serve in our armed forces themselves. So a round of applause to them also who've joined us today. Thank you very much. Now, as you arrived here, you'll have heard the wonderful voice of our very own Kirsten Osborne over there, who is our very own Welsh songbird and the official Royal Marine sweetheart. So we're looking forward to hearing more from Kirsten a bit later on. Thank you very much, Kirsten, for opening the event. Now, when you arrived today, you may also have noticed St. Michael's Church on your arrival. The church has a special display of poppies inside today, and it's open all day. So please, if you do get a bit of downtime, a cup of tea, pop on over there to see their display. Now, I've got a couple of housekeeping rules to run through before we get started. First of all, the toilets can be located outside the main entrance here and to the back. There are disabled ladies and men's out there. Also, the fire exits are on either side of the hall, two behind these curtains, which will open up after the presentations, one out the back there, also here, so there's plenty of exits to get out, and the fire assembly point is out in the car park. If at any point you need some help or you've got any questions, we've got Hugh, Neil and Owen from Cymru Dyfed with us today. Give us a little wave. So they will be your point of contact, so head on over to them if you've got any questions. Now, first up, before we get started, I'd like to introduce Hugh Davis, who is the founder and director of Myddfai Hall, where we are today, to give us a brief history on this incredible location. So please put your hands together for Hugh Davis.
Bore da, everyone, and all our honoured guests today. The community of Myddfai is delighted to host this event on your behalf. This hall didn't used to look like this. The land was gifted to the community in 1952, and just post-war, a prefabricated building was stuck onto some cottages that are now our shop. It was a very much loved centre by all the community and very much used, but fell into a state of dilapidation. It was only ever put up as a temporary building, but lasted nearly 60 years. It was a highly decorated building on the interior by the time we got to about 2006. There's a lovely green shade on the walls on the inside, which wasn't paint, it was algae. That's how dilapidated it was. So the community went on a mission, really, to try and replace it. It's a very small community. So fundraising became quite difficult, because if you work out the maths of the amount of money it costs to replace a hall divided by the amount of people in the community, it all gets a little bit complicated. There are only about 80 people live in the village itself, and only about 400 people in the entire parish of Myddfai, because that's spread around in outlying farms. However, in 2006, I found myself being called upon to help, and we managed to raise some funds to look at some designs. And by 2010, while the then Prince of Wales, our now King, was also working on Llyn and Wormwood, we managed to find a way in with a programme from the big lottery called the Village SOS scheme. Myddfai at that time was a village SOS. It had lost its post office, it had lost its pub, it had lost its school, and the only remaining building that had any value, we hoped, if we could replace it, was the community centre. In order to do that, we had to establish two businesses in order to find a way of sustainably keeping a building of this size going. And then we went through a lot of consultation, and the then Prince of Wales, now our King, was a great help to the community and supported us through his foundations to look at designs and ways that we could build and establish the businesses. That took a little while, and we managed to be successful with a development grant and then with some core funding to get the walls and the roof on. But of course, that was okay, but we had nothing inside the building. So then we went through something like 22 funders to get all the funding necessary to create the building that you see now. What the community wanted was a multifunctional centre that would serve both the community of Myddfai but also the wider community. And the business proposition was that our businesses would support young people and adults with learning difficulties, and would support local artisan businesses. So in our shop here, for example, there are 70 individual artisan businesses selling their wares to the tourists and the people who pop in to see us as often as possible. We also wanted to brand Myddfai. Myddfai is very famous for the physicians of Myddfai, and we needed to get that story out. It became very strange to us that quite a lot of people were using the story of Myddfai, and yet Myddfai itself was going into decline at that time. So we branded Myddfai. So Myddfai is now trademarked as the place of the physicians of Myddfai. And the companies that operate share that brand and work together. The King was a great help, and in fact, as Prince of Wales, himself and the Duchess of Cornwall opened and unveiled this place and planted a gorgeous cherry tree, which is out the back there. They also, a few years later, came back and unveiled the beautiful window that you can see above you, which was made by the community and by one of our other directors who helped train those people. It's been a very long journey for the community, and it's wonderful that we can now host events such as this and have the capacity to be able to spread the word about our humble little community. The King, I am sure, would be delighted to know that you are here. In fact, I expect he probably would like to be here himself. So it's a great pleasure that I can pass on his message to you. I hope that you enjoyed the day, and I'm sure that if you get the chance, some of you will be able to go across to the church later on in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr iawn to Hugh. Thank you very much. Now, without further ado, we are delighted to have with us this morning the Lord Lieutenant of Dyfed, Miss Sarah Edwards, and UK Government's Veteran Commissioner for Wales, Colonel James Phillips. The Lord Lieutenant will now open our event before Colonel James Phillips introduces our veterans on the stage. So please put your hands together to welcome Miss Sarah Edwards to the stage.
Good morning, Boroda. It's a huge privilege to be here on behalf of His Majesty, and also the greatest pleasure for me to be here. Some of us have met before, others were meeting for the first time. But I would like you to know how welcome you all are. Thank you so much for making the effort to be here today. Your stories are extraordinary. I think this is billed as a celebration of what you have done, the greatest generation, and all those who have followed. But I think it's also an appreciation of what you have done. So many of you were not able to talk about what you did, not even to your nearest and dearest. That requires the most enormous discipline, self-discipline, which few of us could hope to emulate. And for that, I think I speak for all of us when I say how much we respect you, and we value you, and we appreciate what you did. All of you played your part. And I think that you've gone on to inspire generations who've followed on. So I remember being here with His Majesty and when he was Prince of Wales, to open this centre, which is aimed at welcoming everyone, which indeed it does and has continued to do. And I know that he would want me to pass on his sincerest, warmest, best wishes to all of you, and gratitude for what you have done and the inspiration and this magnificent spirit you've shown. You're all very precious to us, and all I can say on behalf of all of us is you're so warmly welcome, and on behalf of everyone, a huge, huge thank you.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Now, next up, I would like to welcome Colonel James Phillips to the stage to introduce our very special guests who are here with us today, our World War II veterans. So please put your hands together for Colonel James Phillips.
Don't worry, I'm not doing karaoke. Oh, I see why that's not. Oh, I don't have to say. Right. Brilliant. Try it like that. There we go. Okay, good. Good there. Well, Boroda, everyone, and thank you very much, Cymru Dyfed, for organising this incredible event. And I think we've already heard this morning an awful lot of superlatives, and I'm afraid I'm going to carry on in that tradition, because I think we've got some very, very special people here on both sides, both tables here. And it's a huge honour as a Veterans Commissioner, appointed by Secretary of State for Wales to ensure that veterans in Wales are looked after. And it's my pleasure to be here to pay tribute to a very special bunch of veterans. So if you allow me, there's a lot of detail, so I will be reading from a speech, but I'll try and make it not too dry. So I am very humbled to be here today in the presence of so many of these heroes, and I know they won't like that term, but I'm afraid that is what you are to us. You are all heroes on both tables. You were brought up with the constant dread of Luftwaffe bombs, the fear of Nazi invasion, and these very ordinary young men and women and boys and girls endured and demonstrated that bulldog spirit that eventually defeated an axis of evil here in Europe, but also in Africa and the Middle East. And there are some in this room today that were too young to serve in the Second World War, but they subsequently played their part, often through national service, fighting in Korea, in Malaya, and then in the Cold War, and even participating in nuclear testing. So ladies and gentlemen, as a veteran of over 30 years service, I salute you all. But I have a very special task here today, and that's specifically to introduce the handful of veterans we have here who did actively participate in the Second World War. They are amongst the very last of 3 million men and women that served in that conflict. And they represent all the services from the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Army, the Royal Air Force, and the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service. Their service, ladies and gentlemen, is incredible. It ranges from the dangerous but life-sustaining escort duties in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, through the tough and arduous campaigns in Greece and Italy, to the Herculean effort of D-Day and the liberation of Europe, and the hot and perilous Far East conflict, and also the secret world of code-breaking at Bletchley Park and the occupation of Italy, Germany, Austria, and Japan after surrender. So let me introduce our veterans. I would ask you, if you can hear, to raise your hands so everyone's clear who you are when I come to you. So we've got Tony Bird from Freshwater East. He joined... Tony joined the Royal Navy in 1942, and on HMS Clematis on D-Day, he fired in the assaulting troops and then protected the essential Pluto pipeline and Mulberry harbours, without which the Allied invasion advance would have faltered. He also managed to shoot down a V-1 flying bomb. Also from the Royal Navy, we have Neville Bowen from Ammanford. One of 3 brothers who served, although the other 2 were in the Army, Neville also joined the Navy in 1942, and he witnessed the horrors of U-boat attacks on Allied convoys as he escorted them, including a very near miss on his own armed merchantman. Today, Neville and his wife, Valmai, celebrate 76 years together. Congratulations to you both. And another sailor is Ceredig Evans from Aberystwyth. A mere young whippersnapper, Ceredig delivered milk through the London Blitz, joining up in 1945, just as the war in Europe was ending. He was posted to the Mediterranean theatre, where his ship, HMS Mainel, a Hunt-class destroyer, was involved in the evacuation of Palestine and the infamous Corfu Channel incident, which off the coast of Albania, which is perhaps the very first act of the Cold War. Sticking with the senior service, we have Dr. Norman Rose, a Royal Marine Commando from Brecon. Norman joined up in 1942, aged just 17. He first saw action in Italy before being transferred to Force 7 Commando, with whom he was involved in the D-Day landings, as well as the battle for Port-en-Bessin in Normandy. Norman's war was finished when he was injured at the battle for Walcheren in Holland in November 1944. But not thwarted by his injuries, Norman became an esteemed nuclear physicist and a doctor of history in later life. Moving now on to the Army, we have Idval Davis from Llanelli. He was called up in 1944, initially for aircrew selection with the RAF. He was diverted to the Army and ended up as a tanker in the Queen's Own Hussars in Italy, in the Army of Occupation. However, his pre-war skills as a butcher were recognized, and despite his highly skilled training as a driver, a gunner, and a radio operator, he found himself once again at the chopping block. But then an army does march on its stomach. Another airman turned soldier was Duncan Hilling from Saundersfoot. Having also been diverted from RAF training as aircrew, demand petered out, Duncan trained as a Bren gun carrier driver in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, and in January 1945 he was posted to India with the intention of taking part in the invasion of Burma. However, he remained in India until the atom bombs were dropped in Japan, and that invasion was not required. He was then sent to Hiroshima with the Army of Occupation and witnessed firsthand the horror of nuclear weapons. Posted to Malaya, Duncan contracted yellow jaundice, spending 3 months in hospital in Kuala Lumpur before being posted home and demobbed. He became a very successful head gardener after the war. I hope those green fingers aren't glowing. Richard Peltzer from Swansea was unusual. He had actually intended to join the army. And in 1943, aged 19 years, he trained as a Royal Engineer and was posted to port maintenance working on underwater demolitions. Dangerous and difficult work. Richard was then posted to Scotland to work on the Mulberry Harbour project in preparation for the Allied invasion of Normandy. He landed on Gold Beach on D-Day, and then moving on to Juno Beach, his task was to clear the beach and the ports and German military installations of munitions and booby traps. Very dangerous work. The attrition rate in this line was very high, but Richard survived. And the army then sent him to India to support the liberation of Singapore. After the Japanese surrender, Richard was involved in the sensitive and harrowing work of burying deceased Allied prisoners of war. After the war, Richard worked in civil engineering until he suffered a serious accident, and then he moved into education and photography, a skill which he had learned as a sapper. Now, Bill Shepherd from Cardigan can't be with us today. He was called up into the army as a signaller in 1942, and his high level of proficiency saw him assigned to work with US forces. Although his ship was damaged en route to North Africa, and he disembarked in Taranto. He then took part in the slow and bloody fight up Italy before working with the Gurkhas in Greece, rooting out communist partisans. Bill spent his last 2 years in uniform occupying the reconstructed Austria, and after the war spent 40 years in the diplomatic service. And he celebrated his 100th birthday this year, although unfortunately he's not well enough to join us today. Now, last but not least, we have Charlotte Betty Webb, MBE. Betty joined the ATS in May 1941, aged 18. She had a good grasp of German from pre-war exchanges and also spoke Spanish. Her talents meant that after basic training, she wasn't sent to be a driver or a mechanic, but was recruited into the secret world of Bletchley Park, where she worked on German and Japanese signal intercepts. 80% of the 5,000 staff at Bletchley were women. But their strict adherence to the Official Secrets Act meant that very little about their huge contribution to the war effort was in the public domain until recently. Betty rose to the ranks of the ATS and as a staff sergeant was assigned to Washington, D.C., working with the British Joint Services Mission Office in the Pentagon, which had only just been constructed. Again, she was working in the area of Japanese intelligence. She was demobbed in 1946 and joined a territorial army and retired from the WRAC as a captain in 1969. I was 1 year old. So I think you will agree that this is a hugely talented and heroic bunch of veterans that we have with us today. And I hope I haven't stolen too much of their thunder. But I also would like to convey a message, not from the King this time, but from the Minister of Veterans Affairs, Johnny Mercer, who is aware of this event today and is sorry he can't join us. I just need Hugh to put the slide up, I think. I don't know if you can read that, but I will read it out in case you can't. So, from Minister of Veterans Affairs, Johnny Mercer. I want to send my best wishes to all those celebrating at the Our Greatest Generation event in Dyfed today, alongside the Veterans Commissioner for Wales. Our veteran community is united by a common bond of commitment and sacrifice that will never fade through the passage of time. It is vital that the stories of your service are recorded for generations to come, because without them, we have no foundation upon which to build the heroes of tomorrow. Thank you for your service. Now, I think this schedule is for a Q&A session with some of the veterans. And so it would be nice if people think of a question while I perhaps break the ice and ask a question of some of our veterans who actually served in uniform during World War II. Now, I'm a very proud artilleryman, a soldier, and I see that there are people here from all three services. We've got Air Force in uniform, Navy in uniform, and there is a terrific rivalry still between the three services. And I wonder if there was a rivalry at the time between the services and how you experienced that. And I don't know if there's anyone down there that would like to answer that. Who'd like to go first? Duncan, could you answer that? We've got a microphone coming.
I've never found out why until many years later. I dare not mention it.
He was so talented.
But there was one experience which I had, which is unusual. I flew from Milton Aerodrome at Carew during the war, 1943, in an Avalanche. We flew out over the Irish Sea, and as we came back in, we came out of a very heavy cloud and flew into the towing wire between the Hawker Henley and the target, and it took our windscreen out. It was very noisy and wet and then unactive, but we did land safely.
So that was when you were in the Air Force, or was that when you were...
When I was in the ATC, just before joining the Air Force. It didn't put me off, but they decided that the RAF had enough of people like me, so they sent me into the army.
But you never told them you'd been in the Air Force first?
No, sir.
So, Neville, do you have have you got any stories you can tell about the rivalries between the services?
Well, I stayed with the Navy and Army gunners. So we got on very well together. I don't see any difference in it. When you've got a job to do, you do the job, and you don't care who it is. We all pull together, and that's what I'd like to see today. Everybody pulling together. It would be a better world, wouldn't it?
That's very wise. I don't know if Tony's got any reflections on the differences between the services as well.
I think my most vivid memory is the camaraderie between the services. I was in the Royal Navy, which is rather a remote service, inasmuch that we are at sea, divorced. I think the sound is not very good here.
It's better when you hold the microphone.
Can you all hear me? Yeah. Well, I enjoyed my time in the services, but I think the welcome we've had today is perhaps the best memory I have of my service. And I would like to thank everyone here who gone to tremendous trouble to greet us, welcome us, and I thank you all. Many thanks.
Betty, I know that you signed the Official Secrets Act, and I hope that you will relax your adherence to that, to share perhaps some of the experience you had at Bletchley working with an awful lot of people in different uniforms and different services.
Yeah, well, it was a complete surprise to me to be suddenly dropped in at Bletchley because, like everybody else, had no idea what was going on there. And having read the Official Secrets Act, I realised that I was completely cut off until 1975, as far as talking about it was concerned. And the sad thing is that my parents both died long before I was at liberty to tell them what I'd been doing. However, that's just the luck of the draw. But it was the most wonderful experience for me, because I'd been brought up in the country. And here I was with, in the region of 5,000 people from walks of life, which is an education in itself. And I consider that my time at Bletchley was one of the best things that anybody could have. And I still work for Bletchley whenever they want me for anything. So I'm proud to say that I am still very much involved.
Before you give the mic up, Betty, would you be able to say a little bit about working in the Pentagon and what that was like, working with the Americans?
Yes, okay, sorry, I've forgotten about that. Now that was another great surprise and privilege. I was sent out because I was actually translating, not translating, but phrasing Japanese messages which had already been translated, and sending the messages out in a slightly different form, which we hoped would fox the enemy if in fact they had picked them up. Unfortunately, we were never told whether in fact this happened. But for me, it was a wonderful experience to work in the Pentagon with 32,000 other people and experience a different life altogether in the short time that I was in America.
Thank you, Betty. I wonder if Myddfai could tell us a little bit about his training as a tanker in the run-up to his deployment. Could you say a little bit about your training as a tanker before you joined the Queen's Own Hussars?
Well, what happened when I had to start the war, 2 months after the war started, I became a teenager. And when I was 15, I joined the Air Training Corps with the intention of going into the RAF when I was called up. I served for 3 years and D-Day took place. Just after that, then I received my call-up papers and I went to Birmingham to go before an aircrew selection board to see whether I would go into fighter command or bomber command. But an order came through to say that because of the losses in Europe, they wanted soldiers and not sailors or airmen. So I sent home and I was called up and went to Derring Lines in Britain where I was trained as an infantryman. But out of the squad of 40 that joined up at the same time as me, just 2 of us were chosen to go and train on a further course, and that was in the tank corps. Now that meant that I was training for nearly a year because I had to learn so many things. I had to learn driving, to drive 1500 rates, Army 3-tonner Army lorries, up to the 45-ton Churchill tank. Then after that, then I had to learn gunnery. So I fired everything from a pistol through Tommy guns, Bren guns, anti-tank guns, right up to the gun on the tank itself. And then after that, then I had to do a course on to be a wireless operator. I had to learn Morse code and how to send and receive it on the radio. By the time I'd finished my course, the war had ended. So I got sent then out to Italy in the Army of Occupation. And I joined the 7th Queen's Own Hussars. They didn't look at what I'd been trained as. People were getting demobilized, the old soldiers, and they looked at what I had done before I joined the army, and I'd worked in the butchery trade. And good, they said, our butcher's just been demobbed, you can be a butcher from now on. So I trained for 4 years
to be a soldier, and I ended up doing the job that I learned when I left school.
Yes, okay, all right. Richard Peltzer, I wonder whether we could ask you for some of your recollections of D-Day.
Good morning, all. As I say, I'm a Royal Engineer, but actually speaking, my profession was an underwater demolition boy. I wear a proud badge in my tie, which is a diver's tie. And one of the boys who went out to France took a photograph of one of the suits that belonged to our pool when we put the anchorage down for Mulberry Harbour. Of course, as you know, that we went on a couple of hours before the main task with a task force, which we called the number 12 beach clearance flotilla. So he part Navy, part Army. That our job was to seek out all the obstacles before the landing craft come in, to damage the landing craft. And I must say that one of the important things about the invasion was the time. And if everybody, perhaps you can't remember it, but the time wasn't double time, double summertime, but it was treble double time. So when the invasion took place at 6:20 in the morning, when the HMS King George put a broadside in, the French and German and all the people were still in bed. When the boys dropped on Pegasus Bridge, there was nobody there at all. But we went on then to capture the ports and everything, and my favourite port, which I'm truly say I worked hard on, was Cymru. That was the only port that was operating to fetch supplies in. And we took it, the Canadians captured it, and we took it over to get it running. But I also had the opportunity of doing an emergency job in Holland, where the RAF went in and they breached the dikes so that they could clear the Germans out. And of course, the fighting going up in there, and remember it quite well, it was January 45, when we towed a piece of the Mulberry Harbour, which was the case of the breakwater, to breach the dam. I worked with it instead of reporting back to my unit. I was back in this country in the first week in January. I had my own inoculations, vaccinations and a lot. And I went out to Burma. But when we got to Burma, I was in the acclimatized area, where they turned around and said, straight, you're not going to Burma, you're going down to Ceylon. So I went down to Ceylon, and they turned around and said, we're practicing now for the invasion of which was going to take place in Singapore. And it's a secret, and we like myself, I've signed the Secret Act as well, but the operation was Operation Bow and Arrow. I was in the Malacca Straits when they turned around and announced that the Allied forces had released the secret weapon on Japan. Anyway, we went to Penang, which is on the coast of Malaya. From there, we went in then down to Singapore, and I remember the units that were with us. We went to Singapore and then established in Singapore, and believe me, the atrocities I seen is nobody's business. But after that, I had a cushy job. They turned on and said, you went out now to Java. Went out to Java to get the prisoners of war that were in prison camps in Java to fetch them back to Changi. And the only person I recognised was Motorola, who I used to follow the cricket. But after the war, I recognised quite a few people. But that's the only time I cried when I seen those boys. And our mottos were, you can give them a fag, but don't give them anything else. And I stayed on in Singapore until 1947. And I was offered a job out there, but my fiancée at the time wouldn't come out because she didn't want to leave home. So anyway, I gave the job up and I came home and got demobbed. But I'd be honest here that I wouldn't say I enjoyed the war, but I enjoyed doing a job well worth.
Thank you, Richard, very much. I wonder if Ceredig Evans could tell us a little bit about delivering milk through the Blitz and perhaps what the Corfu Channel incident was, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room don't know what that was.
When I joined the Navy, I was posted to Veterans Holiday Camp in Skegness. I thought I was going to have a holiday, but I soon found out different. After that, I went to Malvern in Worcestershire, where we done our basic training. You go in as boys and you come out as men. And then from there, I went to Devonport to do my training as a stoker and firefighting course. When I went in the Mediterranean on HMS Maynard, a hand-class destroyer, that's where I spent all my sea time. When I came back to Britain, we went to Harwich and we put in ships in mothball. There were about 80 different destroyers and frigates in Harwich at the time, and paying off Finns in the war. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ceredig. We were joined during some of those discussions by one of our veterans who I did introduce, but I will read the introduction again so that he knows what we've said about him. And it's Dr. Norman Rose, who was a Royal Marine Commando from Brecon. And Norman joined up in 1942, aged I think just 17, and first saw action in Italy before being transferred to 4-7 Commando, with whom he was involved in the D-Day landings, as well as in the battle for Port-en-Bessin in Normandy. And Norman's war finished when he was injured in the Battle of Walcheren in Holland in November 1944. And I wonder whether Norman would care to share some of his experiences with us.
I am the last person that took part in the invasion of Normandy on the 6th of June 1944. now known as D-Day.
If you sit down,
Sit down, Larry.
be nice and relaxed. Well done.
So, Dr. Rose, could you tell us a little bit more about your experiences of D-Day?
Who was speaking to her again, darling?
Yes. I landed on Gold Beach, and I was never sure whether I'd see the next day or the end of this day.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed. And I wondered...
I am nearly 100 years of age. On my last birthday, the 11th of August, I was 98 years of age.
I wondered, Duncan, whether you were able to tell us a little bit about Japan and your experiences there.
It's very difficult to describe. I went out to Japan with the advance party to prepare for the arrival of the Royal Welsh Fusilier Battalion. We were actually the 25th Independent Brigade, which was the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, the Camerons and the Dorsets. I spent most of the time then wandering around. I went to Hiroshima, Nagasaki. It's really impossible to describe the destruction and the effect it had on people. The number of, this was possibly 6 weeks after the war ended, and there were still lots of bodies lying around on the roadsides in houses which had been destroyed. There really isn't any way to describe it. The one thing which is well worth mentioning is the friendliness of the Japanese people towards the occupation troops. I've never come across anything like that anywhere in my life before or since. The army were trained to hate their enemies, never to surrender. That was the ultimate sin, and this created people who were quite different from the Japanese people themselves. And any of you who want to visit Japan, it's a fascinating country. The people will welcome you and will talk to you. The other thing I found interesting in Japan was the number of people who could speak English. Almost every schoolmaster I met, most of the policemen had a very good grasp of English. The only problem was it had an American accent. but yes, I was very fond of the Japanese people, and you cannot really compare them to what the troops are like. Japan itself, I travelled from north to south. It's an amazing country. It covers several thousand miles from north to south. And the north of Japan, the north end of Hokkaido, has snow and ice. We were travelling back from Tokyo to our base at Tokushima, and we were snowed up for 3 days. The railway trains could not move at all. We had hundreds of people with picks removing the snow from the line before we could move. Yeah, for anyone who wants to visit Japan, I would say go there and enjoy yourselves. It's a lovely country. It's so different from north to south. They're lovely and warm in the south, but much colder in the north. We were on the island of Takamatsu, which is just off the east coast. And we spent a month in Tokyo. I guarded the palace and the emperor at the time. We also had guards on their radio station. There was no television at that time, of course. And yeah, really the welcome of the people of Japan is well worth the effort of getting out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Tony, I wonder whether you'd care to share some of your experiences of D-Day and then afterwards.
Well, I think we all know what happened at D-Day, but Duncan has just recalled visiting Nagasaki, and after the bomb was dropped, we were actually on the point of invading Malaya when they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He saw the result of it. We were fearful that we would be attacked by kamikaze pilots. We carried out the invasion at Port Swettenham, but the Japanese had gone completely. So I'm very interested to hear the effect of the bombing on those Japanese cities. People think that it was a horrible act of war, but from my point of view, it saved countless lives, because the Japanese fought like demons every yard of ground on their, as one approached Japan. Every ground was fought for and lives were lost. So I would say to you all that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was really required at that stage and shortened the war perhaps by a year. So many lives were saved.
Thank you, Tony.
As for D-Day, I got very little to recall, except thousands of assault craft going in, bodies floating in the water, shells coming over, aircraft going over to drop parachutists inland. It was a feat of arms which has never been surpassed and never will be again. And I salute all these army people who actually landed, because in the Navy we are a little remote. We are on the sea, a little divorced from the land, so we don't actually see what's going on. But I would salute the people who actually fought hand to hand in France.
We've heard a little bit about the Japanese soldiers. I wonder whether, Richard, did you encounter many of the line German infantry and soldiers in your role?
The only German soldier I came across was the gangs being taken a prisoner of war. Because, as I said before, that I was kind of beachcombing.
And was that clearing munitions, or were there booby traps as well?
You know, because once we got the port going, we moved on to the next port and got captured. And we went up the coast then from Cossels to Ritapo, Abbeville, Douville, Trouville, right up the coast to keep the supply going. There's one thing that I can say, that in my 5.5 years, after being called up after doing my apprenticeship, I had 7 days leave. I didn't see home for 5 years.
We touched a little bit on the secrecy, not just at Bletchley Park, but I think around, particularly around D-Day and things like that. And Tony, you talked a little bit about being slightly remote from things in the Navy, but could you tell us about that sort of level of security and secrecy that kept D-Day secret? Were you restricted in what you could do and say? And
I can't quite hear you.
So the secrecy around D-Day and the restrictions on yourself in terms of what you could tell family and loved ones and write home about. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I can. We didn't know what was happening. I was stationed on a Sour Task corvette based at Sheerness. We knew that tremendous build-up of troops on the southern coast, but we had no idea that we were going to invade France. We sailed from Sheerness to Portsmouth, and we were held there for 2 days because of bad weather. And then we set sail just before dawn, escorting literally hundreds of ships. towing assault craft and carrying assault craft on their davits, but thousands of troops were lining the rails, and I noticed that a lot of them were seasick because the sea was quite choppy. We approached, I was on Sword Beach, which is just off Armagh, and as we approached, fairly heavy fire came from the Germans, not too bad, but our battleships were lobbing 15-inch and 18-inch shells inland, and the thing I noticed greatly was the number of aircraft flying over, literally hundreds of them, going inland to drop parachutes to secure the bridges inland. Assault craft were bobbing about in the choppy seas. The beach at Sword was pretty heavily defended with spikes and barbed wire. I had a bullet whiz past my left ear, and that's the nearest I came to being shot on D-Day. But unfortunately, a lot of people the LCAs were hit by shells, and I'm afraid that bodies were floating around in water. We couldn't make any effort to recover them because the main object of the attack was to get troops on land, and luckily we succeeded. And as a result, the war was won.
Thank you, Tony. Neville, I wonder if you're able to tell us a little bit about the U-boat war and working on the convoys and the threat from the U-boats.
I've got a story to tell you about the time I met my brothers who were in the army and they were serving abroad. I'd gone to America and I'd received a letter to say that my brothers had gone abroad. So we sailed across the Atlantic and back into the Mediterranean and to, not Alex, North America, North Africa. I can't remember the name of the place. Anyway, we pulled up in this dock, and one of the stevedores there was talking to me, and he recognized my accent. And he said, "Oh, there's some of your lads here." He said, "What are they?" I said, "Oh, the Welsh Regiment." "Oh, my brothers and that," I said. "All right." So after I finished my watch on the gangplank, I said to my mate, "We're going out ashore now. I'm going to find my brother." That was a big question, wasn't it? Anyway, we got ashore. Now, my eldest brother was Will, and my youngest brother was Doug. Will was in the artillery, Doug was in the Welsh Regiment. So walking down the road now, the Welsh Regiment was supposed to be there, and 50 yards ahead of me, I recognized this back. It was Will. So I walked up and tapped him on the shoulder, and he said, "Where the fuck did you name in? What are you doing here?" Anyway, I took him back to the ship, and we had a meal together. Then we went ashore and had a few drinks, and that's the last I saw of him. Well, went back to America, across the Atlantic, back to the Mediterranean, and I heard from home now that my brother Doug had been wounded on Mount Casino. So we went to Alexandria. In Alexandria, I was supposed to be taken off this ship now to go on to another ship back to England. So I said, "Where is Doug?" I was told that Doug was in a hospital in 70th General in Italy. So I said, I made inquiries to where was this hospital, and it was in Naples. So I asked where the ship was going from Alex, and he said it's going to Naples. So I said, well, I'm stopping on it, I'm not going home. We got to Naples, and I asked where this hospital was. I don't remember the name of the place. It was near Vesuvius. Anyway, I went to this hospital, and I saw my brother, and he'd been wounded and badly. And on top of that, he had yellow jaundice. So I was with him for the first day I was with him. I said, I'm going back now to the ship. I said, I'll be back tomorrow. So I went out to the autostrada to get back to Naples, to the ship. And I saw two boys in the RAF standing by the side of the road. And I said, where can I have a lift back to Naples? I said. And one of them turned around, Neville, what are you doing here? He was from Saron. So anyway, I went back, and he asked me what I was doing, and I said I was visiting my brother Deb. And I was there for about 3 days with him. On the third day, he said to me, I don't know, he said, how I'm going to tell you this, he said. But next time the hospital ship comes in here, I'm going home. Well, I've got news for you, I said. The hospital ship is in, and I'm going home.
Yeah.
So we left at that time. The next time we met was in Swansea. He came back to Plymouth, and from there he was taken by taxi from Plymouth to Swansea Hospital, accompanied by a nurse all the way. And that's when I met him after. Both my brothers survived.
Brilliant.
And that's my story.
Thank you very much indeed. Betty, if I could just ask you to talk a little bit about how you covered up for what you were doing when you were, in terms of your work, and when you went back to your billet, and if you ever got time to socialise, what you said you were doing.
Very boring secretarial job. That was my answer. The one that worried me a bit was to begin with, we were in civilian billets in villages around Bletchley before the camp was built. And occasionally my landlady, who was an absolute dear, by the way, she said, what have you been doing today? And that was my answer. A very boring secretarial job. And it did keep people quiet to an extent. What was your other question, sir?
It was whether you had any time to socialise and what you did for socialising.
As a matter of fact, it was a very balanced life. Work permitting, we had concerts and plays by professional people who'd been brought in. And there was plenty of opportunity for sport. And of course, I used to drive around the countryside then, and you young people won't understand that we had no signposts, so you had to remember which way you went.
At 20 miles an hour, yeah.
Yes. So I remember one very professional gentleman, Herbert Murrow. I expect you're all too young to remember him, but he was a professional. So we had wonderful concerts from him. And the young man who was a violinist, he used to give us quite a lot of entertainment, both here and in Washington. He seemed to be following me around.
Thank you, Betty. I think you all agree there's some incredible recollections there, and I would impeach all of you to come and share some time with these veterans and hear some of the stories they haven't shared here publicly. And I'd just like to thank you all for your honesty, your candor, and your ability to stand up so agilely and to sit back down again and to manage a microphone. So thank you very much, all of you. It's been a pleasure hearing about your stories.
Okay, we've got a very special occasion happening now. The gentleman concerned isn't aware that this is happening. His name is Gordon Davis. Gordon was, he served in the Army and the RAF. He served on Christmas Island, participated in the nuclear bomb tests, and unbeknown to Gordon, his medal has arrived. And this is the opportunity, really, the place, really, where this should take place, that Gordon is going to be presented with his medal today by the Veterans Commissioner and the Lord Lieutenant of Dyfed. So, Gordon.
Yeah.
We've got Sarah Edwards, the Lord Lieutenant of Dyfed. And Sarah Edwards, she's the Lord Lieutenant of Dyfed. And
I'm representing His Majesty the King here today.
okay. We've lost his hearing aids in hospital. And
I'm Colonel.
Hello,
I'm Colonel James Phillips, the Veterans Commissioner, and I'm representing the Veterans Minister.
Pleasure, no.
okay.
Well, this is a very new medal, which has only been issued in the last couple of months, or last month, for those veterans who participated in the nuclear testing, but went on just after the Second World War. And it's a great pleasure, I think, for both of us to be able to present this on behalf of His Majesty to Gordon Davis.
Overdue, but very, very much deserved.
Many thanks. Pleasure to receive from you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon, and thank you for your service.
And to care for my country, as I did, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Giacomo.
Right, okay, my name's Hugh Morgan. I'm the Veterans Coordinator for Cymru Dyfed. Now, there's 3 names on the Myddfai War Memorial relating to the 1939-1945 war. There's also a 4th name inside the church on a brass plaque. 2 are soldiers, 2 are airmen. We know less about the soldiers and rather more about the airmen. So it seems right and proper that in an event held in Myddfai to celebrate our greatest generation, that we take this opportunity to remember those who lost their lives as still very young men. And they were fighting to keep these shores free from fascism under all of its evil guises. So the first one, and this is the one we know least about, is driver Glan Thomas. So we'll start off with Glan. Glan was the son of Stanley and Margaret Thomas of Myddfai. It appears that at aged 18, he enlisted and became a driver in the Royal Army Service Corps. He fought initially in North Africa and then in Italy, where unfortunately he lost his life on the 12th of July 1944, aged just 20 years. Glan is buried in the Bari War Memorial. The next one is Private Errol Price. So Errol was one of 7 children in the Price family from the parish of Myddfai. Today, members of Errol's family still live in the area and continue to remember his short life. And I'm really grateful to the family for passing across some information and a photo of Errol to me via our volunteer in this village, Sue Pick. So please, thanks Neil. Okay, so there's a photo of Errol. So Errol enlisted on the 2nd of July 1942 in the army, and by the end of October he had been promoted to Lance Corporal in the South Wales Borderers. Over the next 15 months or so, he received attachments to other regiments, including to the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Errol left the UK with the South Wales Borderers in January 44 for India. On the 2nd of May 44, he was compulsorily transferred to the 1st Battalion of the South Staff's Regiment, who were engaged in heavy fighting against the Japanese in Burma, alongside Brigadier Ord Wingate Chindits. By early June, it seems that Errol was involved in the fighting at Pinmai and its outskirts. Pinmai sounds as if it's sort of quite a large village. And also shortly after, when the Gurkhas and the Staffordshires attacked and secured the village of Mahung, within which a Japanese headquarters was located. Also in that short period of a few days, there was fierce fighting for the Pinmai Bridge, with Allied casualties of around 130. And it may well have been here, or near here, where Errol was mortally wounded on the 12th of June. So he was just 20 years old when he was killed, and Errol is commemorated on the Rangoon Memorial in Myanmar, but he is still remembered here today, 80 years on, by his family. So now we come to the two aviators, one who'd been born and bred in Myddfai, and the other who, through tragic set of circumstances, was brought here into Myddfai Church, just across the road here, on a willow hurdle on Christmas Eve, 1944. So we'll look first of all at First Officer Thomas Rogers. Thomas was born in 1917 and was an amateur steeplechase jockey prior to enlisting into the RAF on the outbreak of war in September 1939. He clearly wanted to do his bit. In his flying training room records, there are comments from RAF officers which indicate that whilst Thomas was an average pilot, he was an extremely shy man. In fact, the words "painfully quiet" was written by one of his flight commanders. At the height of the Battle of Britain, in the summer of 1940, Thomas applied to transfer from the RAF to the Air Transport Auxiliary. In support of his application, the Vicar of Myddfai wrote a testimonial for him. As his vicar, I can speak of a good and reliable parishioner. As a personal friend, I know his honesty and sincerity will commend him to others, as his fine qualities have commended him to me. Thomas was accepted into the Air Transport Auxiliary on 19th November 1940, and as a flight officer, and over the next 12 months, he ferried a variety of different aircraft to and from various locations. He eventually became a member of Number 6 Ferry Pilot Pool, stationed in Sherburn in Elmet in North Yorkshire. On the 10th of December 1941, Thomas was given the task of transporting a Blackburn Botha to Number 48 Maintenance Unit at RAF Harden near Chester. This particular Botha had just come from the factory and was a spanking new aircraft. By all accounts, the Botha was not an easy aircraft to fly. Built primarily as a twin-engine torpedo bomber or reconnaissance aircraft for coastal command, it was underpowered and had poor visibility from the cockpit. Thomas's flight path took him over the Peak District. Weather was poor, and he took the aircraft above the clouds to try to clear the bad weather. It seems that he then descended through the clouds thinking that he had cleared the hills in the Peak District. Sadly, The aircraft struck the moorland near Glossop around midday and caught fire. And we have to remember that this was a very remote area, so Thomas was initially reported as missing when he did not arrive at his destination of Harden. 2 days later, on the 12th of December, his mother received a telegram saying that Thomas was missing. The following day, the phone went. His stepbrother answered the phone. It was Glossop police wanting to speak to his father. They reported to Thomas's father that he had been killed in the crash. In fact, his body had been found lying in deep mud underneath the wreckage of the aircraft. Thomas's funeral took place in Myddfai Church on the 18th of December 1941, just a few days later at 2 p.m. Now, Neil, could I just ask you to show a photo first of all, next one along. So that's Thomas for you. And now go to the next one, please. And that is Thomas's grave here in Myddfai Church. The Peak District contains probably well over 100 wrecks from World War II aircraft which crash. You know, the main cause of crashes for all of the high ground throughout the UK would be bad weather. Sure enough, just a quick check on the internet. If you can just show the next one. Here is the remains of Thomas's aircraft 82 years later. Okay, so we come on to the last story, and it's a particularly tragic one, really. Flight Sergeant Thomas Charles Jones. He wasn't from Carmarthenshire, but grew up in Hucklecote, Gloucestershire. In late 1944, Trevor was a flight engineer on Lancasters at number 166 Squadron, based in Kirmington in Lincolnshire. Aged just 19 years old when he died, with Trevor's body being carried here to the village church in Myddfai on Christmas Eve. The actual search for him provided one of the more unusual and slightly troubling stories of World War II, when no less a figure than Air Chief Marshal Lord Hugh Dowding, head of fighter command, of course, throughout the Battle of Britain, personally intervened and got it what appears to be very badly wrong. To put this into context, on the 9th of December, Trevor was on a Lancaster on a navigational training flight. Encountering bad weather over the Brecon beacons, the pilot lost control of the aircraft and it tumbled down from 24,000 feet to 8,000 feet before the pilot regained control. He made it to RAF Fairwood Common, which is on the Gower Peninsula, and executed a forced landing there. But during the alarming descent, 4 members of the crew bailed out, including Trevor. Of the 4, 3 were found safe quite soon after, but Trevor was missing. He had obviously survived the landing because his parachute and flying help had been found, neatly folded, some 5 miles south of Myddfai. This is an area of remote, hilly countryside, peat bogs, streams. And we have to remember that this is during wartime, so there was a blackout in place. The Mountain Rescue Team at Madley, RAF Madley in Herefordshire, was alerted to begin the search. And this is the point at which Dowding interfered. Dowding was a spiritualist and had been told by a psychic medium where to look for Trevor, and so instructed the search and rescue team from Madley to focus their search on the Brynmawr area, the other side of the Brecon Beacons, some 40 miles away. And of course this diverted the focus of the research. It was then on Christmas Eve, some 2 weeks later, that sheep farmer Gwyn James of Myddfai was checking his sheep when he came across Trevor on a path. Trevor's leg had been broken and he had dragged himself along the path until he died. Gwyn The farmer contacted Llandovery police and Trevor was carried down on a hurdle to Myddfai church where a short service was held, and his body was then taken to the home of the vicar, Emlyn Davis, before sometime later being transported back to Gloucestershire for a family burial in Hucklecote. So there is now a commemorative plaque to Flight Sergeant Trevor Jones in Myddfai Church, and I'm particularly grateful to Hugh Davis, who spoke earlier, who's provided me with a written transcript of the events which took place, which remarkably had been on display in Myddfai's former pub for many years, in which the futile search for Trevor Jones had been conducted. Thank you very much.